Hi, welcome to the Jon Gaunt podcast. One of my extended interviews again today. I'm talking to a guy called Chris Middleton. You probably say, who the hell's he? Well, I was like that myself. But if I said to you, he's the guy who did the Mud song about Starmer, then you know him straight away. He's also now saying some really interesting things ever since he got the sack, or did he walk out of BBC Newcastle? And I think he's an interesting new voice in the whole platform of independent broadcasters. And he's got a lot to say about BBC bias. A lot of what I've been saying for many, many years and often felt like a lone voice. So I'm delighted to say, welcome now to the Jon Gaunt Show, Chris Middleton. Hello, Chris.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. Listen, tell me about, let's talk about the song first. I thought it was great, mainly because I loved Mud when I was a kid. But where did you get the idea from to do a charity single?
Well, I actually got the idea originally on X. I saw just a random comment from someone basically saying that someone should do a Christmas single to raise money for the pensioners because they're going to be cold this Christmas because the government is cutting the winter fuel allowance. Let's raise some money for pensioners. And funnily enough, Lonely This Christmas by Mud has always been my favorite Christmas song. Yeah. Everyone thinks that's a bit weird because it's kind of a depressing song, but I always just enjoyed singing the chorus. Like I always found it really, really fun. So that I love
the bass player, Rob, who had the flares. I always say, and the flares got bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually he was wearing a dress. And we all think that we didn't realise. And of course, he became Kylie Minogue's producer. So a good pedigree. And Les Gray, what a singer. Right, on we go.
Is that Rob Davis, the sort of guitar player?
Yeah.
Yeah, so well, jumping forward a little bit, what was great was that the Telegraph did approach Rob for his take on the song before Christmas, and he said that he loved it, which I thought was really good. Just that song was in my head when I saw this post on X because it's my favorite song, and I thought, well, Lonely This Christmas, Freezing This Christmas. Sort of started thinking about it a little bit more. Just the lyrics just started coming to me because I knew the song so well, so I was doing it in my head. And I got the chorus together. I was like, oh, that's quite good. And then I said it to some friends. They said, yeah, why don't we just do it? Like, just actually do it. How often do you come up with an idea like this? And obviously now on the internet these days, you can just do anything. You know, you can hire someone on Fiverr, which I did, to sing it, hire someone else to do a video. All of that cost me about 250 quid. Spent another 100 quid doing like Facebook ads and things like that. Then just furiously started messaging people on Twitter to hopefully try and get some pickup. And eventually it did, and it just sort of snowballed from there, went completely out of my hands, and then got to number one in the download chart, in the sales chart. Pretty crazy, really.
There was some talk that it should have been number one in the total charts, but it was manipulated. I mean, there's all these great stories of songs like that in the past, protest songs, of course, all the way back to the Pistols and before. So do you think there was some manipulation? They didn't want that to be number one on Top of the Pops?
Yeah, I think people always go to the sort of conspiratorial angle, don't they? My take is just that, unfortunately, the way that the charts work these days, because it's so based on streams, streams get a lot more weight than sales and downloads do these days. And what happens is, especially in the lead up to Christmas, is everyone's just putting a Christmas playlist on Spotify or on Apple Music or whatever. And these songs, all the top 40, Wham, Kylie Minogue, all the classics, they're just constantly being played on repeat, just in the background. So that just racks up loads and loads of streams for them. So ultimately, we did come first in the sales chart, which is a separate chart, the download chart, which is a separate chart. But in the overall chart that combines all three of them, including streams, we only came 37th in the end. But that did mean we were in the official top 40. So the BBC did have to go through it in the charts. Obviously, they didn't play it, of course, but they did have to mention it briefly.
And were you really angry about the winter fuel? And what is it that angered you about it? You're a young man yourself. What was the problem?
Yeah, good point. I think I was, like a lot of people, I was annoyed in general at the government, more so because of the lies. Like, that's one thing that really annoys me the most. That it might not seem like it these days, but the reason that I wanted to become a journalist is because I have an interest in the truth. Ironically enough, even though you might
forget that you're working for the BBC, forget that, mate.
So it didn't sit right with me, the lying, and the fact that it wasn't in their manifesto, but it was one of the first things that they decided to do after getting into power. But the thing that annoyed me the most is when the Tories wanted to do this exact policy under Theresa May in 2019, and at the time it was Jeremy Corbyn who was the leader of the Labour Party. Keir Starmer was, I think he was the Brexit secretary or something like that, but he was part of the shadow cabinet. And when Theresa May wanted to do this exact policy that Labour did, they produced a report that said, if you do this, 4,000 people will die.
Yeah.
So that's their own report. And I imagine they probably inflated that to try and make the Conservatives look bad. But you can't then implement the exact same policy when you've done a report that says 4,000 people will die. That means you're happy for 4,000 people to die, by your own words, to essentially save about £1 billion, which in government spending is essentially an accounting error.
Yeah, it was a spit in the ocean. So it was the hypocrisy that annoyed you. Are you a lefty then? No, I'm asking a straight question. Where's your politics?
I'm definitely not a lefty. I would say that I'm centre right, but I don't really like the left and right labels as a whole. I think they're very reductive, and I think they don't really help anything. It's more just like my side, your side. Obviously, I have a view. My general view is that I'm in favour of freedom. I'm in favour of the government ideally being smaller and out of people's lives, leaving people alone, which puts me more on the right side of things. But I'm left on some issues. You know, I'm left on a lot of social issues. I'm more about freedom, and I'm happy to take every point on its own merits rather than any sort of overall worldview.
Well, I've been saying to people for ages, it's not left and right. Left and right is dead. It's them and us, and I certainly know who them are. And they can be left-wing people, or they can also be right-wing people. And I also, one of my favourite sayings is the relationship between a journalist or a broadcaster or a columnist should be that of a dog and a lamppost. It's our job to piss all over them. It isn't our job to get in bed with them. And I found when I got to London, when my career was sort of perhaps in its at its height, most of these people are sleeping with each other, either metaphorically or in reality. A classic example being, what's his name? Jabba the Hutt, the guy who used to do Sky News, Adam Bolton. His girlfriend was Tony Blair's gatekeeper. And then he married her. And to me, that was all wrong. And, you know, you meet these people, they're going hammer and tongues at each other. And then, should we go for a cup of tea? Or do you fancy going for a meal? I just thought it was all false. I thought it was all a pantomime. And to be honest with you, it's got worse over the years, and it's disgusting. They all play a role. That's all they do. It's almost the same as being on one of those TV shows where they say, Chris, would you come on and talk about this? And you go, yes. Would you also talk about that? What's your view on that? And you give them your view, and they go, we'll come back to you. Because you're not going to say what they want you to say. Well, politics shouldn't be that, should it?
No, not at all. And that, when you were just saying that example there, the thing that sticks in my mind is a very recent one is Ed Balls, who now works for ITV, Good Morning Britain. Yeah. And his wife is Yvette Cooper, who's the Home Secretary. And then he's there interviewing her about the government's policies. I mean, it's just absurd.
It's obscene. That's what it is. It's not just absurd. It's obscene.
Yeah, exactly. And the optics of it are just ridiculous. My whole view about wanting to be a journalist and the thing that I try and do now as an independent journalist, and what journalists are meant to be, is holding power to account, not, as you say, getting into bed with them. And the power in our society is obviously the government, it's the elites, and it's the media now as well. And a lot of the time, a lot of media institutions do this, but the BBC do this a lot as well. And we saw this. I did a big piece last month on the Online Safety Act. I don't know if you know much about that, John, but the government line for that is we're doing it to protect the kids. It's to stop kids from accessing porn on the internet. That's the government line. That obviously sounds really good. But when you dig into it and you look at all the extra things they're doing that are eroding free speech, all of a sudden it's one of the most Orwellian things that's ever been introduced in the UK's history. But if you only watch the BBC, and there are people that I know, like older people, like my girlfriend's parents and people like that, who I know, who only get their news, or many get their news from the BBC, who think that that's what it's about. They don't know any of the wider context. No. And in that instance, the BBC is literally just repeating the government line, which isn't doing journalism. That's just doing PR for the establishment.
That's right. But that's like the BBC. They've always been into protecting children, haven't they? That's why they employed the nonce Jimmy Savile for so many years. When that all broke, oh, no, we didn't know about it. All the top echelon. No, knew about Jimmy Savile. I was on the radio in BBC Coventry. Everybody knew he was a dodgy so-and-so. Absolute rubbish. We'll come back to the Online Safety Act in a moment. Let's go back to the Christmas single. It must have made you really pleased when policy, and I think your single contributed to it, when they actually dropped the policy. Did you celebrate? Did you think, my God, I've actually been part of something. I've achieved something there with my journalism? Because I say your song is journalism.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I mean, it's part of holding power to account, right? It's not journalism in the traditional sense, but it's a way of spreading a message and highlighting an issue. There
is no traditional sense of journalism. Never has been.
Sense, let's say the mainstream media sense.
You just do it the way you want to do it.
Exactly. But my view was they brought it in July, and I think they did that because it's obviously the other side of the year from Christmas and winter, so you can hopefully brush it under the rug. So the song, I think, did bring it back into the public consciousness in quite a big way. And if you go to fast forward to the local elections, which then happened in May, a lot of the people were saying on the doorsteps, it's the winter fuel allowance, and that and part of the song, I think, helped get that certainly into some people's minds. And it was that comms, those surveys and people telling the Labour people on the door, that's because people aren't that interested in politics day to day. There'll be one or two things that mainly stick in just the average normal person's head.
Of course.
And I think partly to do with the song and partly just because it was such a stupid policy that just pissed everyone off. That was really rooted in people's heads. And I think after they got absolutely destroyed in the local elections, they had to go back on it, basically. They realized how much they'd screwed up. And I like to think the song certainly played at least a little part in that.
It played a big part, in my opinion. And, of course, it was his lies and his U-turns, more U-turns than Stig out of Top Gear. I mean, the guy's just an arse. But do you feel any guilt that you've ruined his life? Because he isn't going to last. Labour might last 4 years. He isn't. He's finished. He's more than toast. He's gone. And you're partly to blame. You little upstart in Newcastle.
Well, I actually got a mention in the last PMQs of the year. I don't know if you saw this. One of the Conservative, he was a Conservative MP, brought it up. It was the last question of 2024 in PMQs. And that was quite funny because me and my friends were talking, I wonder if Starmer's seen it. He must have. And then he gets directly asked about it as the last question of the year. And there he is on the podium just sort of going, he doesn't quite know what to say. Going back to your question, whether he stays or goes, I don't know. If he goes, my main concern is, well, who's going to replace him? Because I don't think any of them are any good, to be honest with you. That's the whole issue that we have, I think. They're all
it'll just be like the Tories. There'll be a succession of leaders ending up with a lettuce. I mean, it'll just be the same because the whole political establishment is full of shit. Anyway, let me just come back on that then. So you've ruined not only his Christmas, but you've ruined his political career. I think that's a badge of honour, my friend. But and I think the next badge of honour you got, then the BBC sacked you, didn't they? Or did you walk out?
Yeah. Well, can a freelancer be sacked? That's the question. I didn't work there full time. I'd worked there consistently for 7 years doing freelance work. I was the guy that they would come to first when they needed someone to come and help out. And it was part of the work that I did, and I was happy to do it, and I enjoyed it for most of the time. But I did have 2 months of shifts all through December and January that were cancelled when I told them about the song. And
what did they say? What was the reason they gave, Chris?
It was because of impartiality, because I was a journalist broadcaster, and doing a political song, breaches my impartiality, so I no longer seem impartial. And I knew that would happen. When I first put out the song, my plan was to do it anonymously because I didn't know how well it would do. For all I knew, I would get maybe 10,000 views, 50,000 views, maybe raise a few £100 for pensioners, and I would have been happy with that. But when I started to get offers to go on to the media, I then made the decision of, okay, I now need to show my face. I need to put a face to this in order to push it as far as I can. And I knew when I told the BBC, I mean, my first appearance was going to be on GB News. And if you know anything about the BBC, it's that if you even uttered the words GB News, they sort of recoil in horror at you. So when I told them that, I knew what would happen.
But the point is, they use the impartiality card all the time. They used it years ago against me, but not when it's people like Gary Lineker, because you can clearly separate when you're working for the BBC. I'll give you a great example. When I was on BBC London, I was the best paid local radio presenter in the whole country, and I got an offer to go and work for the Daily Star, and it was loads of money, tens of thousands of pounds. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. I told the BBC, and they said, you can't. I said, why not? Impartiality. I said, oh, hold on. It's a column. When I write the column, they know that's me, and it's not the BBC's views, etc., etc. And I said, what about Vanessa Feltz? Because she did the show after me. And they said, Vanessa was famous before she came here. And I said, what a load of balls. Anyway, 6 weeks later, thank God, I got offered a job on The Sun, which was a lot more money. And I told them I'm choosing Mr. Murdoch's money rather than you lot. And they were back, to be fair to the BBC, the very upper echelons. There was a man called Pat Lockery who was in charge of local radio, the whole of it, the nations and regions. He was a grown-up about it. He knew it was rubbish. He knew these rules were rubbish. And what annoyed me about it most was the fact that they think the BBC audience is thick. They're not thick. They would have thought, that's Chris having a laugh. He's having a crack. That's all right. Doesn't mean he can't report on the fact that the sewage isn't working in fucking, I don't know, Jarrow or whatever, does it? You know, that's what people are like. People consume their media. They don't just get brainwashed. But, of course, the BBC, in a way, want to brainwash people. Yeah, well, this is the issue with the rules and the vague wording of words like impartiality, where the vagueness allows them to pick and choose when and where to apply it. The issue is when you only apply it in one direction, people see that, and then that is where the bias creeps in, and people do see that. You know, the listeners and the readers and the viewers aren't stupid. People are more clued in now than ever before, and they're more aware of it, and it's more obvious to them. Yeah, I think also with impartiality, where the dam began to break, with them being able to use that excuse, is the very thing that you and I are doing now. I'm in my bedroom, although it looks like I'm in a house with a grand piano, but that's called a green screen. You're in your little flat or wherever you live, and you put a plant behind you because you're BBC trained, and that's what they always have, a plant pot in the background. So you need to stop doing that. Anyway, we're breaking it because now we can just get a poxy little computer, can't we? A microphone, and we're on the same level, and we can now tell our truth. And journalism should be about telling your truth. If you go back to the Greeks and drama, the bloke used to end up in the market square and he would tell his tales of the war. Then another guy would come along and they would create scenes, and then it became drama. It became theatre. It became the story. It became Billy Connolly telling his tales. That's what journalism should be. And people can raise an eyebrow and go, oh, that Chris Middleton, he's a bit of a right-wing so-and-so. But that's interesting what he's saying there. The audience is not thick, is what I'm getting at. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's now why you're seeing a lot more independent journalists rising on the internet, on YouTube, and on X, because people know what they like. You know, it is a marketplace, essentially. And there has to be different people that cater to different things. You can't just cover everything in journalism, especially as a single journalist. You have to pick and choose what you talk about. And obviously what you talk about is going to be the things that you're interested in, that fit in some way to your worldview, the things you're concerned about and the things that you're worried about. And then you develop an audience that is also concerned and worried about those things as well. And I agree with that. The only thing I would say there, we used to call it in theatre. I was a theatre lovey, right? I was an actor and a playwright. Don't play the effect. You should never think, what does my audience want? And just play up to that. So sometimes I upset my audience. You know, people slam the phone down, or when I used to do phone-ins and stuff. But that's not, I wasn't deliberately making them do that. I was just telling my truth. And I think that's what we can do, which the BBC can't, and which is why independent broadcasting in the end will triumph, even though we don't make any money. Yeah, well, what I sort of meant it the other way around, whereas an audience capture is a big issue, especially on the internet, when you start to see getting views for talking about certain things. I meant it more the other way, where for me right now as an independent journalist, I'm trying to focus on free speech, which I think is one of the most important issues in the country at the moment. It is media, free speech, which ties into the other areas, which is media bias, narratives, and government lies, basically. They're the main issues that I'm concerned about and I want to cover and write about. So I will naturally, over time,
build an audience of people that are interested in those things, because that's the way it works. It's, it's like newspapers in the country. People always have this idea that it's, the right-wing press, the Daily Mail and the Sun are causing people to hate immigrants, for example. But it's the other way around. It's the people who have concerns about immigration go to those papers because they're the papers that are actually talking about it. Whereas most people see it as the other way around, that it's the newspapers influencing the people, but they're just catering to a market that has interests in those topics. And then those people will come to get that information because that's what they're concerned about.
I used to say newspapers, and I did work for the Sun for 6.5 years. Basically, they reinforce your own prejudices. And in a sense, that's what the internet and internet broadcasters do. The secret to be really successful is to undermine that. And that's what columnists, Clarkson's and I guess me and people like that on the Sun were trying to do. So you get the audience, but you can't have a front page of the Sun which said Jaguar cars are polluting monsters, which you would have on the front page of the Independent, and no fucker would read it. But in the Sun, it's got to be beautiful. I mean, it's changed slightly because they've gone woke. But, so I think we've got common ground there. That's interesting what you're saying. So do you think you're making a difference?
Good question. I hope so. I'd like to think so. I think that's what any journalist would like to think. I've only been doing this now for a few months since I sort of stopped working for the BBC. So I've finally been able to spread my wings and focus on the things I want to. The good thing about places like X is that what I've learned is if you put out good information, if you can and write something that's in depth, that's giving people information on a topic, then the algorithm, if the algorithm likes it, it'll blow up, 10, 20, 100 times more than the followers that you have, and the reach gets out there. So I think that's why, Elon said about X, we are the media now. And I think that is certainly true because the algorithm is clearly designed to put forward the content and the ideas that people are interested in. And if you can put out good information, pray a little bit to the algorithm gods, then you can get yourself out there and make it.
And how do you turn those impressions into followers? Because your numbers aren't great, are they? But your numbers for individual videos or things you do, as you say, can explode exponentially. Well, exactly. But then how do you get them to start following you and build your audience?
Well, that's a good question. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I mean, I've only really been doing the sort of X stuff properly for the last 3 months.
Yeah.
And in that time, I've gained about 10,000 followers from my different threads and ideas that I'm putting out there. I don't think there's a specific way to do it other than just by keep putting stuff out. You seem to get on the really good stuff. You seem to get maybe about 1%. Not 1%. I think it's like 0.1% of people tend to follow you if they're interested. And then when people start to see your name crop up a couple of times, they get a little bit more interested as well. So I think it's just a matter of plugging away at it and just keep building it over time. That's my current goal.
Do you use YouTube as well?
I don't at the moment. I've thought about it because of the song, because I put the song out on YouTube and the song, I think it's got about 2.7 million views on YouTube. So I actually have a YouTube account that has 16,000 subscribers because of the song, but I've not actually done anything with it at the moment. I've been focused mainly on the writing side of it, but it's certainly something that I'm considering.
Okay. All right. Now, talk to me about this latest row. By the way, this is the Jon Gaunt show. I'm talking to Chris Middleton. I really admire him and respect him. He's new on the scene. I think what he's doing is absolutely brilliant and exciting. I'm going to nick some of his ideas. But you know what they say? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Ask all the idiots who are on telly now doing my acts. I've got so many tribute acts. It's unbelievable. I sound like Donald Trump there. It's a beautiful thing. But listen, let's come back. There's more. Tell me about this thing about impartiality that you've been writing about. And I tell you what, when I read it, and I read your thread on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, I thought, by God, he's got it. He's saying what I said years and years ago, and no one would listen. And when I was like on local radio and then on, national radio, but mostly with the BBC on local, even on BBC London, I was like the sole voice who was right of centre. And I never considered myself that right. I just was a white working class lad who couldn't quite believe he'd got where he got to. And then, of course, when I'm writing for The Sun as well. But they saw me as the devil personified. But I just thought I was saying what my mates who work at the JAG think.
Yeah.
And they're not racist or sexist or anything else. They're the fuckers who are going to protect you when we get an invasion from China or Russia. Yeah, that toxic people that you don't like, you bunch of tofu-eating liberals. You're going to need those guys. You're going to need those because they're willing to fight.
Exactly.
Anyway,
yeah.
So you basically you've illustrated this. Tell me how you illustrate it on the latest protests. Tell me what happens in the BBC.
So I always knew, even from when I got out of doing journalism as a master's and trying to get work at the BBC, I always knew that they were slightly to the left at the time. I was well aware of that. I think it's definitely got worse over the last sort of 7-8 years that I've worked there. And these things started to become more and more apparent to me. One of the most stark things that I noticed that I really didn't like came about last year when there was the protests and then they turned into riots. But initially there was days of protests following the Southport murders, which was last summer. And obviously everyone was very annoyed at that for multiple reasons. Obviously the act itself was incredibly horrible and it really shook everyone around the country. So people were rightly upset for that. But the wider issues of why that unrest was happening was clearly, in my view, because people were annoyed about immigration. They'd been ignored about immigration, having voted to lower it for like 20 years and being ignored by successive governments. That was all just bubbling under the surface. And I think an act like that, okay, the guy was a Welsh choir boy, allegedly, but his parents were refugees that we welcomed into the country. And then they raised a son that went on to go and do these acts. And that all ties into why people were angry and upset. And when people started coming out across the country protesting, and my patch was the Northeast, one of the biggest areas where there were protests that turned into quite bad riots was Sunderland. So there was a lot for us to cover at the time. And I was told that if the protests stay peaceful, that they're not newsworthy and that we won't cover them. Which, okay, they have a policy of that because there are loads of protests that happen all the time that are small protests. Yeah, sure. You're not going to cover them all. That would be stupid. But in my opinion, if there are loads of pockets of protests happening around the country at the same time, fair enough, each individual one might be small, but they're all connected because they're all related to this one incident that's happened and they're peaceful. That to me is incredibly newsworthy because it's showing that there are loads of people all around the country that are so annoyed with the government, spurred on by this horrific act that's just happened, and they're that annoyed they're getting out and they're going out to the streets independently of each other, all spontaneously around the country. And to me, that is massively newsworthy, even if they're peaceful. But I got an email saying that if the Sunderland protests stay peaceful, we're not going to cover them. And I didn't like that. And I really didn't like that at all. And then eventually they did turn more violent. And there were some horrible things that did happen in Sunderland. There was things getting set on fire, people going to a mosque and I think putting windows in and things like that, which obviously that's all horrific, bad things. But before that, they did start off peacefully. And these things, you know, all these sort of protests always attract the wrong uns. And tying into that as well is the way that when it's just normal, everyday working class people coming out on the streets to it takes a lot to get the working class to come out to protest something. Normally it's all the sort of middle class lefties who want to go and protest every weekend. So
every revolution in history has been a bunch of middle class tosspots. It's not the proletariat.
And this is the thing. This is what always annoys me about that, because they claim to act on behalf of the working class. But in reality, when the working class actually speak up and tell them what they think, they are just immediately far right. This label.
Yeah, well, I want to let me get you on that, because Starmer, of course, after he ran away from Southport, was there for 10 seconds. I mean, I watched that Channel 4 documentary the other night, which I thought was absolutely brilliant, because they used a lot of, mostly mobile phone coverage of local people of the shots they took. But he ran away, and then he said they were far-right thugs. That was a massive misstep by him, a massive miscalculation. It is one of the things, along with your little pop song, that is going to wreck his career. And it showed me that he wasn't fit to be Prime Minister. But I think many people in the media kind of agree with him. And what you've just talked about, we used to do the things called Vox Pops. I don't know if they do them anymore on BBC local radio and telly, where you go out and you get somebody and you say, what do you think about this? They go, send them all back. What do you think? Send them all back. And then the third person would go, well, actually, I think we need to have a well-balanced. The person who said that, he got equal weight in the Vox Pop. So you can have 99 1,000 people saying, hang the bastards. And you can have one person saying, no, let's cuddle them. And you had to give it balance. Well, it's unfortunately not a journalist's job to give balance. It's the journalist's job to tell the truth, even when it's not very nice.
Yeah, and the issue with the far right thing that Starmer did is he just fell into the classic left-wing trap, which works when you're not the prime minister, which is just to shout the other side down, use the words, call them a racist, call them a xenophobe, call them far right. He just used that classic left-wing playbook, which is that you don't have to actually address any of the concerns of immigration or this killer, because
didn't he actually say? Right. Didn't he actually say at one point? I don't want to understand. I'm just going to condemn, which was almost a mirror compliment to what a Tory had said years ago. I can't remember which one it was. He tried to become the leader at one point. But anyway, he said a similar thing. We need to understand less and condemn more. No. We need to condemn, but we need to understand why. And in this whole year, they haven't got to the why, have they? Which is why now, I don't know how much coverage you've given this as well, we got the migrant hotels and you got ordinary women, working class women saying, I'm really worried about my daughters. I don't want this. I want to be able to walk down the street. And now, of course, that's backed up because some sexual assaults, some rapes, allegedly, have been carried out by migrants who have come in on the boats. And now even the BBC are beginning to alter the way they describe this, which has got to be a good thing, but it's a pity they didn't do it right from the beginning. Because surely a rape is a rape is a rape, isn't it? It doesn't matter who's done it.
Well, of course. And I think that the optics of putting the women front and center now, that making it a women's safety issue, having the women doing the main protesting, women and children, families, that's a great move from the protesters, because if it's just a bunch of rowdy men, it's very easy for the government and the media to say, oh, look, it's just this is the far right. It's a load of men just want to get aggressive.
It is the gammon with beer bellies.
It's not, even if it is just like normal working class blokes from the pub who are pissed off. It allows the optics of it allow them to say it's the far right, but you can't say that when it's just a bunch of women wearing pink. That you would obviously look ridiculous to start calling them fascists and racists and all this, because they're clearly doing it for the reasons. So that's great optics, in my opinion, from the protesters. You talk now about the BBC sort of softening things. I just did a thread yesterday. I don't know if you saw it. So I did my thread 2 weeks ago about BBC bias and the protests. And it was talking about how they cover the protests differently. How if you look at the historic protests about BLM, about climate change, about pro-Palestine, which are clearly things that the BBC worldview agrees with, they will always go into depth about why these things are happening. They'll talk to the protesters. Even if there's violence happening in the protests, they'll still go above and beyond to talk to reasonable people, try and get their views, give the background on why it's all happening, and be sort of favorable towards them. But when it comes to any protests against immigration, you just never see that at all. And following a few days after my thread, I don't know if they saw my thread and it's related, or if they were just going to do this anyway, they put out a piece which on the face of it seems like it's giving sort of more balance. It's going more into depth.
I read it. The first 4 sentences, I thought, bloody hell, who's written this? Somebody's got in.
Yeah, but so the woman that they talked about in that, a woman called Orla, they sort of made her the main figurehead of it. And the day after that was published, she contacted me directly and said, I'm absolutely furious with the BBC and the way that they've portrayed me in this article. So I was like, oh, okay. I sort of gave it a brief read and I thought, oh, it's a bit balanced. You know, they've given a bit more history and background to it. After she contacted with me, I reread it again and I thought, oh, God, yeah, they have kind of made her sound like a massive racist, basically, if you sort of read between the lines. So I spoke to her the other day, interviewed her for about an hour, and she told me all about what had happened, how the BBC had twisted what she said. And I put out a thread about it yesterday, detailing all of the ways that article uses these subtle bias techniques. You know, there's nothing overt about it. On the face of it, if you don't sort of read between the lines and read it with a magnifying glass closely, and you're not aware of how these techniques work, it can seem like they are giving both sides. But there's very subtle ways that in my view, they've smeared her, essentially. They've put things together. They've not told a lie, but they've put things together in such a way that just someone reading it casually would be very easy for them to associate her as being a racist, as being a Nazi. And as a result of that article, as a direct result of that article, she started receiving death threats. She started receiving abuse. And, you know, this is the national broadcaster. The BBC has a duty to be fair to everyone and to all views. And she's literally received death threats as a direct result of that article because they've misrepresented her. And I just didn't think that was fair.
Is it an impossible task for the BBC in the multi-platform, multi-streaming world, you know, citizen journalists, GB News, everything else that's going on? Is there a place for the BBC? Is there a place for a compulsory poll tax to pay for it? Is it time just to say, let's split that money in a different way? But the BBC with their huge buildings. After I was on BBC London, just before I got the Sun job, they offered me to go back to BBC Coventry. I said, but why do I want to do that? And they said, because we'll pay you the same money we're paying you to be in London, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, well, I'll do the Sun job as well. But of course, I hadn't told them at the time. But what a load of bullshit. They'd spent £3 million on new studios. I think they did the same in Newcastle, for BBC Coventry and Warwickshire. They'd done everything. Digital studios, all the lot. They could all link it up with a telly. They hadn't employed any fucking talent. So they had no talent. They had nobody locally who knew how to do it. So they had to come and get Gaunty. I was meant to come back and rescue it. I was there for 6 weeks, and then I went to the Sun. But that's my point. They're playing catch-up if they're playing anything, and it's impossible. I say scrap the BBC, and it breaks my heart because the one thing I used to say, I'd scrap the whole of the BBC apart from local radio. But the more local radio I'm listening to now, it's Sub Radio 2 1960, and it's kind of the Carpenters experience. And it should be all talk. If I listen to BBC Newcastle, I should be saying to you, Chris, what the hell are these Geordie bastards talking about? And if you listen to Coventry, you say, what's all that about, John? It should be that local, and it's not. Scrap it. Sorry, over to you.
No. I had a sort of similar view, I think, about the local stuff. But now they've neutered local radio so much that they basically are all the same around the country. They're kind of just cookie cutter. There will be the odd local thing that's in there clearly, but all the music's now the same. All the playlists are the same in the music, so that's completely pointless. What's the point of having local radio if you're then just going to come up from on high and say these are all the rules of how they have to be the same? That's just very stupid. My view on the BBC as a whole is that the point of having stuff, it's separate from the government, but the point of having things that are public. No, well, semi. But the point of having things that are public is it's to fill a gap in the market. It's something to cater to something that the market can't do. And as we've seen over the last 10 years, local news has really fallen by the wayside because there's not very much money in journalism anymore. All of the local papers were bought up by the Mirror and a couple of other companies.
Just talking about that. The Mirror's websites for all the local newspapers, none of them work, and they're crap. And it's all just big pictures, isn't it?
There's constant pop-ups everywhere. I mean, they look like spam websites. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. But because they own them all now, they share the stories. So you'll go on to the Chronicle, which is the Newcastle's local paper, and there'll be a story from Shropshire or something. You know, they're all just because they've absolutely gutted the funding for any actual local journalism. I could talk about this for days. There's all the stuff about court reporting now that you never get. So you were hearing about crimes like late if we're hearing about them at all because there are no court reporters anymore. All of the local commercial stations have now been merged to national stations, so no local radio. So the BBC is the sort of last vestige of actual local radio. And that's what
they should invest in.
I agree. In theory, I agree. But in practice, they also just do a crap job, in my opinion. There's far too many managers in these places that are just seemingly doing nothing. I don't know. The people now, especially since the pandemic,
they're doing worse than nothing. They're meddling. That's what they do. And the guy who's in charge of BBC Local Radio, sue me if you fancy, Jason. He used to be my tea boy on BBC Luton. Then he became the TV guy. Jason Horton, his name is. He's gone on. He's got the Armani suits. He's had to have the big waistbands, because he's put on so much weight with all the free food and the freebies, and et cetera, et cetera. And he's absolutely wrecked BBC Local Radio. Like I say, Sub Carpenters experience. And then going on to national radio, I'm ever so sorry, but Radio 1 and Radio 2 could be provided by the commercial sector. And this is the one that really upsets them, Chris. If you love the Today programme, and people go, I love the Today programme, I couldn't live without it. Well, pay for it then, you knob. They could pay for it. Hey, they got 8 million listeners. Get them to pay for it. Radio 3, we've got Classic FM, GB News, Talk Radio that I used to work for, Talk Sport. They do the football just as good, if not better, I would argue, than Radio 5 Dead. Get rid of the BBC. I'm sorry. Get rid of
it. I don't disagree, and especially because you're being forced to pay for it even if you don't watch it, which is the way the license is set up, which is ridiculous. And they always come out with this line, don't they, that, oh, well, the BBC provides X, Y, Z with vital service. Here's what we do. This is why we're so good. But the response to that is, well, if you're so good, put yourself out in the market then, and let's see if people want to pay for you, because there are commercial people doing all of the same things the BBC does. So if you are that good, people will be willing to pay for it. And I think they'll find all of a sudden their budgets will be cut by about 90%.
Glastonbury is a prime example of that. I mean, they take 500 people there. I mean, again, my other T-boy was Ben Cooper. He became the boss of Radio 1, right? And then he worked for Virgin or whatever. He got caught up in some big story where they had 500 people at Glastonbury all on the piss. This was a few years ago.
Right.
And then this year, surely that could be sponsored. Likewise, Match of the Day. They stand in front of that board and talk about the Barclays League or whatever it is. It is sponsored effectively. Let's go the whole hog. Sponsor the whole thing. EastEnders, sponsored by Mogadon. I don't know. It's possible, isn't it? It doesn't have to be loads of adverts, but they don't want that because they've got this cozy little club.
Yeah.
The people at the top and then the middle management as well. And then most of the people who work for the BBC are so talentless now, they wouldn't get a job in the commercial sector. And they couldn't do this. I know loads of people all over the country. I used to train them in how to do phoning. They wouldn't have the balls to do what you're doing, Chris.
Yeah. I think that's part of the problem. It's the same with a lot of things that are the public sector, right? They just get this bloat over time. They expand and they expand and they expand. No one can ever be fired, seemingly, but we will just have another layer of management, and that's why the BBC now. I mean, the BBC could probably operate the same and just do a sort of Doge cutting of the weight, in my opinion, and operate much more leanly and still do the same thing if it was run correctly. But the problem is, because they have the license fee, that money, they just get that money for free. They don't have to do anything for it. At least if you're running talk, you have to in some way actually give your listeners what you want, or what they want, because you have to make money from them in order to keep going. The BBC could basically do whatever it wants. And okay, they're starting to lose more and more license fees now because essentially people my age just don't pay for it because we don't watch it at all.
And people younger than you don't watch linear telly, full stop.
No, we just get everything online now, which is why there was talk a few months ago, wasn't there, of the BBC license fee being expanded to YouTube and Netflix and all this kind of stuff, which is just absurd. Like, I only ever watch Netflix and I need to pay a TV license for the BBC. I mean, if you say the word TV license to someone in America, for example, they think we're a totalitarian dictatorship. Like, you need a license to watch TV. It's so anachronistic. It's just...
Okay, let's move on from that. This is fascinating. I'll let you go in a minute, but I'll tell you what, it's great to meet kindred spirit. I don't think we agree on everything, but it's interesting. Just before we leave the BBC, let's just go back there as well. They promote people. This is what they do, to their level of mediocrity.
Yes.
Once they know that's as good as you can get, which is why the middle management are also jealous of presenters. There's the famous story about Terry Wogan. He used to get to work, get in the lift. As he went up in the lift, as the doors opened to his studio, right, they were playing the intro jingle, and he'd sit down and he'd go on with the blarney. Everybody would love him. It was totally anti the BBC, totally. You can't teach that. It doesn't come out of a book, and they hate it. And the middle management who can't present, and if you ask any of them at Newcastle, they probably all wanted to be presenters, and they all failed. Why? Because they couldn't talk through the screen, through the microphone, through the wall, to the punter in the street. Okay, let's go back now. I want to just finally sort of talk about free speech, because this is what the BBC should be provided. It's what the government should allow, and it's disappearing under a Labour government, which that makes it even more bizarre. Well, they're not a Labour government, are they, in that sense? Where now for free speech? How do we have free speech?
Yeah, I mean, where do we even start there? Free speech, the birth of free speech, it's an English invention, essentially. The original concept of, if you go back the history of philosophy and John Stuart Mill, and the idea that everyone should be free to say whatever they want because you need to have that in a society for it to function in order to develop the best ideas. You cannot have people who are afraid to speak their mind. And what we've seen in the UK over the last 30 years is just that slowly get eroded by various bits of legislation. And it comes back to what we were saying before about the vague wording of impartiality. We've got a lot of laws now on the books that we've had for years. Forgive me for not knowing the specific act off the top of my head, but using phrases like causing people alarm and distress is one of them that they can use to shut down speech. Because you've caused someone alarm. What did you do? You just said that they're an idiot, or you said that their ideas are stupid, and all of a sudden they're distressed by that. So that's now a crime. Or we have the non-crime hate incidents, which is just completely Orwellian. This idea of you're saying things that aren't crimes, but they're hate incidents. And the only definition of something being a hate incident, it's not the content of what was said, it's not the intent of what was said, it's whether someone felt like it was a hate incident. So that could just cover anything.
Or you said something years ago, and although I know him actually, but I'm not a great supporter of Greg Wallace at the moment. However, how come he got away with it all that time? Big Ron Atkinson's another classic one. What he said on Sky TV was wrong, but he'd obviously been saying similar things for a long time. No one picked him up on it. And then you can get picked up, and that's what I'm trying to say. And that's Orwellian, because it's like, you broke this law. When was the law invented? Today. But I said it 6 years ago. It wasn't there. It doesn't matter. If they want to have you, they'll cancel you. And that,
exactly.
I think cancellation is the worst thing in the world.
It's very, very damaging, because, people commit murder and go to prison for 20 years and they come out and they're ostensibly forgiven. You don't
7 years later,
whatever. They've done their crime, they've done their time, or any lower level crime. People go to prison, you do the crime, you serve the time, and then you come out and we consider you to be, reformed in a sense that you can now be part of society. But if you said something bad 30 years ago and it just comes to light now, your entire career can be ruined, essentially. Whereas, a murderer from that time would have since been forgiven. So this whole thing of speech and going back and policing speech, and did you say one thing slightly uncouth? It's ridiculous, and it creates this culture where people are trying to get people cancelled. They're going after people. This is what happened with Orla, who I was talking about before. The BBC portrayed her as a racist, and then people started going after her job. They were emailing her employer, HSBC, sending emails saying, did you know that your employees are racist, trying to get her fired for words that she said and words that were actually misrepresented by the BBC. None of this should be happening. None of this would happen in America, because they have their free speech protected.
I was going to ask you that because it feeds naturally into that. J.D. Vance, of course. I don't know if you read his book. His book is outstanding. Forget the film. The film's good as well, but the book is brilliant. I read it years and years ago. There's a kid, hillbilly, essentially, pulled himself up by, I was going to say his bootstraps, but he never had any fucking boots. He had no shoes. He had nothing. And look at him now. And if he was a black person, he'd be lauded. No liberals would be criticising him. He was a white working class kid in the Appalachian Mountains. Anyway, I digress. He's been going on about free speech, along with Donald Trump, of course. And I was going to ask you, do we need to get it enshrined now? Well, if we had a constitution, if we had a written constitution, do we need that? Is that where we need to get to?
I think so, yeah. And there was a report that just came out yesterday as well from the Secretary of State in America, a report into the UK saying that the UK is losing its human rights, essentially, because of the Online Safety Act and other things that are stifling free speech. The issue always with the UK is that we never have a written constitution. We just have 1,000 years of customs and traditions and things being built upon one thing after another. And historically there was this idea that those things have been built for a reason and you shouldn't meddle with them, or you meddle with them at great peril. And we've seen in the last 20 or 30 years, a lot of those things have just been stripped back a lot. And that's been allowed because there is no written constitution that prevents governments from doing it. If Trump tried to do something that threatened free speech, he would be arrested or he'd be impeached, immediately. And that would be shut down. But because ours is just unwritten, it's done through tradition, it's done through the norms of hundreds of years that have been built up, the government can just basically do whatever it wants. Whether we can get to that in some way, I don't know. I definitely think we should have some sort of constitution that enshrines the basic freedoms of our country that prevent any government, or, you know, I don't know exactly how the constitution in America works. They can amend it and change it, but I think they need like 60%, 70%. They need a very high amount of cross-party support to agree it. But it's very difficult to change those things. And that's how it should be, because those are the basic freedoms of the society. And this is now why we're seeing, in my view, a lot of Europe, including the UK, is starting to drift back towards authoritarianism, when we were the ones that started freedom and liberalism in the first place and then exported it to America. They were just able to codify it because they took the ideas and created the country from scratch. I don't know how we would do it. I don't know if it's possible, but I would absolutely love to have the basic freedoms of a liberal democracy enshrined in a way that means it's very, very difficult for governments to change them, for sure.
Right. I'm talking to Chris Middleton. Going to leave you in a moment, Chris. Just before I go, this is the Jon Gaunt broadcast, whatever you want to call it. You know how to follow me on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, X, and the rest of it. And don't forget to donate to keep it going, because we ain't got our BBC fat salaries anymore, or even our TalkSport, even fatter salaries, or the Sun's massive salaries. We ain't got it, but we're still good. Before you go, what next for you? Because some people say, well, you've pissed on your chips with the BBC. What are you going to do next?
Yeah, well, as I was saying, I was getting disillusioned with the BBC anyway. My time there was coming to an end, and I think in a way it's worked out well for me, because it's allowed me to use it as a springboard to get a little bit of a following initially from the song, which I've then allowed to help me turn into an independent journalist. So rather than having to start from absolute scratch as a sort of nobody, the song has allowed me to sort of skip the first few levels, which is quite nice. So now I'm being an independent journalist. I'm mainly on X at Chris Mid. If you want to give me a follow, I'm doing, as I said before, focusing on free speech, media bias, narratives, and government lies. That's my main focus. I'm there. I'm writing threads on various different things. I've got one coming up soon about the an in-depth look at Labour trying to bring in this definition of Islamophobia, which in my view is just blasphemy laws under another name. So that's coming soon. And I'm just doing that, writing various bits. Articles.
Are you making any money?
A little bit.
It's a straightforward question, isn't it? You know?
No, fortunately, you can make a bit now. So I am doing articles, which get me a little bit of money. My main goal at the moment is to try and build my following more. So I've got just over 20,000 followers now on Twitter. I'd like to try and obviously keep building that as much as I can. So that's the main goal. As you said before, maybe look at things like YouTube might be a good idea. I'm still quite new to the space. As I said, I've only been doing it for a few months. I'm just trying to sort of test the waters, do different things, write about things that I'm interested in, of course, and just try and get myself out there as much as possible.
Good man. Just before you go, people want to know, did you make any money out of the song?
Yeah, well, I didn't, but the song made money, yes. There is a thread coming out very soon, because I've just been donating the money to charities over the last few weeks. So for the song, we had a fundraiser page set up, which was to go to AIDS UK. And that was just people giving donations who liked the song.
How much went in there?
So that was just over 65,000 in the end. And then from the song itself, so the money from the streams and the downloads that people did, all of that's gone to charity as well. I've just got one more, actually. When we get off the phone, I am going to speak to the last charity to give the money to. So from that, we got just over £15,000 from the sales and the streams. And last month, I think it was, I put out to my followers on X asking for suggestions of small local charities that the money could go to. So a lot of people were kind of not annoyed, but they were just saying, AIDS UK, fair enough, it's a charity, but half of it's going to go to the CEO's salary, some of it's going to go to tax, and actually we raised 65 grand, but how much of that is actually going to help pensioners? So I thought with the 15 grand, find 10 small local charities that are just ran by volunteers, put that out on X, got about 300 suggestions from people. Had to go through all of them. So I've been in the process of doing that. So there's going to be a thread coming in the next few days detailing where all that money's gone.
And what's the Christmas song this year? You must be tempted to do another.
Well, I was hoping, obviously I'm glad that they went back on the cut to the winter fuel allowance. It would have been nice just to be able to re-release it, maybe do a new version. I was thinking maybe try and get Rob Davis to come and do the guitar if they hadn't done it. But now they have reversed it. well, we'll see in the budget in the autumn, because they've apparently got this £50 billion black hole now that they've created. So maybe they'll have to go back on it again. Who knows?
I had a suggestion for you.
Oh yeah.
Obviously coming from Coventry, the Fun Boy 3. The lunatics have taken over the asylum. It would sum up Starmer and his bunch of gangsters, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, the one I have had a few ideas. I've been reticent to actually pursue them, just because the first one was such a big success. I wouldn't want to just come out with something crap and then everyone's like, "Oh, here's this guy trying to push it." But one of the ideas that I had was what's it called? We Didn't Start the Fire.
Yeah.
Is it Billy Joel?
Bruce Springsteen? No.
Bruce Springsteen, yeah. One of those. I always get them confused. But it was going to be, I don't know if you know how the song goes, but it's like, "We didn't start the fire," which you would keep because, the country is a fire. And then the refrain would be, "It was all the Tories, it was all the Tories." They always blame the Tories for everything. And I thought it would be good because the actual, the way that song goes, it's just like a list in the chorus. It's in the verse, it's a list of just things. So I thought there could be some clever way to just list all the stupid things that they've done, but I didn't pursue it any further. But I thought it was a decent idea.
It is a decent idea. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Chris. I wish you all the best. I think what you're doing is really, really important. And it was just dead interesting that it isn't just about broadcasting with you. It's obviously the writing and the way to make that happen in independent journalism. Thanks for joining me. Hold on there. I'll come back and say goodbye to you in a moment. What did you think of him? I thought he was really good. Really good. You've been watching the Jon Gaunt podcast. I've been talking to Chris Middleton. I'm back tonight for the normal ranting monster show at 6:30. Hope you can join in now. Then we had a great one yesterday talking about the 60s and being a kid and growing up and the difference between that and now. It's going quite well. Just a quick reminder, the piano in the background is a green screen, so I still need your donations. You can buy me a cup of coffee, www.buymeacoffee.com/Jon Gaunt, or just donate by pressing that little $sign on the YouTube video. If you've been listening on a podcast, feel free to come back and subscribe. Subscribe doesn't mean you have to pay. It's free. Subscribe to the Jon Gaunt TV channel on YouTube, and then you'll never miss one in the future. Been great talking to you. Great talking to Chris. What a breath of fresh air he is. Until we meet again. If you've got kids, give them a kiss. Give them a hug. Hey, hey, hey. Don't forget to tell them you love them.